So, Juan, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me today. If you could just start, maybe introduce yourself. What's your current role? Where are you located?
Sure. Vidal, thank you very much for having me. So my name is Juan Pablo, or Juan Pablo Buritica, or Juan. Um, I am the VP of Engineering at Splice, which is a music company with a tech team, is what we like to say about ourselves. We're headquartered in New York, and I run the distributed engineering team, which is distributed among the United States, and a little bit of our team members are in Latin America.
Okay, great. What is your background and how did you get into management?
Cool. So my background is not very traditional. And in my path into management is quite interesting. It's a little bit of a long story, so I'll give you the medium version, and then if you want to dig a little bit deeper into any of the things that we go into, I'll be happy to. So I grew up in Colombia, in Bogota. I went to pharmaceutical chemistry school and also studied culinary arts. So I actually have a diploma in world cuisine. For just random reasons, I ended up deciding to move to the United States to finish my school, to finish pharmacy school. I used to go to a public university in Colombia, and what tends to happen in some of these public schools in Latin America is there's protests, and there's usually situations that shut down the university for a semester or so, and then you start falling behind. And I was already a little bit older for my age, who was like in fifth semester. My mom had moved to the States, so I convinced her to let me come around and finish school here. And at the time, even though I grew up around computers and next to computers, and it was always playing around or probably breaking it, I had never thought about becoming a computer scientist or an engineer, mostly because cultural factors in Latin America kept me from it. In Colombia specifically, being a technical systems engineer is not regarded as a prestigious career, or it wasn't. It's starting to become a little bit more with this new tech wave, but being a programmer was definitely not seen as an engineering discipline, a prestigious job. And most of the folks who go to like the best universities in Colombia for systems engineering end up taking, funny enough, management jobs or leadership jobs, and move away from programming, which is curious that now I'm in this path. But to go a little bit back to the story, I moved to Florida in the probably worst time to move to the United States, which was around 2007, 2008. The economy crashed. My mother was in real estate, so our home economy crashed, and that led me to help her find a way for us to support ourselves, which is I took a job at a restaurant, which I had cooked professionally for a bit, paid some of my school in Colombia that way, and I ended up working at an Italian restaurant. I led the team there for a while, so that was my first or second attempt at leadership and management. I didn't really recognize or internalize that I was running the kitchen. I was running a team that was shipping stuff every 10 to 15 minutes, and that we had all these processes. But it's come back now that I lead teams. After that, so the restaurant closed. We didn't have enough customers, and I tried finding some of an income. I think I sold office supplies for a little bit, probably, yeah, like door-to-door office supplies. Exactly around 10 years ago, I was selling door-to-door office supplies in Florida. I'm the worst salesperson in the world, so I think I sold to a couple of my mom's friends, and that's when I started thinking about making websites for people. I had a MySpace for my band, for my punk band that I had always set up, and that's how I learned CSS and HTML. I would copy people's MySpace pages and try to like style ours a little bit better. And I wasn't afraid of using computers, so I had an opportunity to make a website for a friend in Florida. He paid me more money than I would make in 6 months at the restaurant, which was pretty great, and started referring me to other people. And one of those referrals was a startup founder in Miami, and he gave me my first tech job at a company called Papatel, which is a free long distance service for Latin Americans. I started called myself the webmaster. I didn't even know what like titles or anything meant in technology at the time. And little by little, I started discovering this tech industry, navigating some communities like the jQuery community. I remember listening to the jQuery podcast and seeing like, oh my God, this is really, really cool. But there's nothing in Miami or in South Florida at the time where I could learn. There was no local community. And that led me to try to find a new place. I moved to New York. It was the same time zone, and I've always been like hardcore punk connected to sort of the music scene in New York. So it felt like the right thing to do. I drove with my dog for 22 hours, rented a basement in New Jersey, and a few months into New York, I found a job on Craigslist for a startup called Panelfly. I was given an internship, and I was their first technical hire, and it was a comic book app, the first comic book app in the App Store and the iPhone. They had invented a application, had some really, really cool stuff. So I joined them. I was there for a few years, and that was my first that was my first time at many things in technology. The first time I led an actual engineering team. I was also full stack, so I wrote a mobile app, responsible for portions of the web, database administration. I also got like very, very deep into technical stuff. And we grew the team. Steve and I grew the team to around, I think 10 engineers at some point. Started hearing about what agile practices were and project management and all these things that I kind of knew how to do in the kitchen, but I had not put together that for software, which is something that had been like self-taught. You also needed to do that as a team practice. And I burnt out a little bit at the company. I moved to another one called Onsite with the desire to just be a programmer. I didn't want to be a leader. I was like, I don't like people. I like being in the back of the house. Just tell me what to do. And then again, I got another opportunity to lead. We grew fairly fast. Our very young CTO went back to school, and we were looking for a CTO for a while, and it's of course always a hard search. At the time, I had already volunteered to lead the front-end engineering group, and the founders noticed that I had at least some leadership skills, and that I was taking my initiative to like help the group organize and sort of like plan projects and defend some of the time. So they gave me the opportunity to run the team, and that was my first position as a VP of engineering. And at that moment, probably a little bit later, was when I recognized first I internalized that I was making a career change, that I wasn't like promoted, but I had the skills that I had were not working, and it was a little bit more closer to what I should have been, what I was doing at the kitchen. So I started reading a lot. One of my friends, Camilo, who was also an employee, shared some of his insights. He shared a blog post by someone, and that's when I discovered like the engineering leadership was a separate track and really a whole discipline that I was a junior person. Even though I had a vice presidential title, I was a junior manager, and I needed to learn about the practice. So that's the long story about how I landed in management.
That's awesome how you made it from the kitchens all the way like into tech. That's very, very inspiring. Could you share with me, what are the biggest challenges you face now in engineering leadership?
Sure. Many. But so since I was at OnSwipe, I had the opportunity to lead another team at Ride, which was, I scaled from 0 to like 40-ish. And now at Splice, where I've been 2.5 years, a little bit over 2.5 years, I've had, let me, probably gonna have to edit this. Or not, you can keep it.
All right, go continue.
I'm gonna back. So I had an opportunity to lead a team at Ride, which we scaled from 0 to about 40 folks, and then sold the parent company over to Enterprise. And then I made the switch to Splice, which is a little bit over 2.5 years ago. I inherited a 6-person engineering team. I was the 15th employee at Splice. We're now 150. And we've gone from 6 engineers to 55, if I'm not wrong, 55. And we continue to grow a little bit. So when you and I first spoke or first met, my biggest challenge at the time continued to be growing the team, right? I think I hired a total of 20 engineers in the past year. I was doing like my self-performance review with our CEO and yeah, so I hired with my management team, we hired directly around 20 engineers in 2018. And we hired the first 25. I guess we scaled the team from 6 to 50 something in about 18 months. My challenge now is not growth, is optimization. So scaling, I'm dealing with scaling problems of systems of people and computers. Since about 6 to 9 months ago, I've taken over the entire responsibility of Splice Engineering. Our co-founder and CTO, Matt Imanetti, starting to focus a lot on innovation, and he's an amazing engineer who is at the intersection of music. Like, he really understands the MIDI is, like what MIDI is, and how to reverse engineer any of the Ableton formats or a lot of those things. And I've taken over the business, like the current business, systems of people and systems of computers of the current business. So what that has meant, and I think the biggest challenge I've faced in my career, is to develop a strategy to accelerate a scaling engineering organization in a hyper growth company, right? We've tripled, doubled, and doubled again in revenue since I've been here. And engineering is the engine of our organization. We're a music company that builds software for musicians. We have a sample library that is a subscription service. We rent plugins for music production. And all of these offerings we have depend on product and engineering. If engineering is not moving along, then the entire organization comes to a halt. So whatever worked for us when we were 5 no longer worked for us when we were 20. And it becomes beyond it goes beyond a paper cut. When you're 50 and you're slowing down 50 engineers, then it becomes very painful. You're burning money. Your customers are not getting support. So I'd say that the biggest challenge I've faced in my entire career in technology has been devising a strategy to accelerate a team, to engineer engineering. And what we've been able to achieve in the past 6 months of work with our engineering organization and the progress you've made to stabilize cycle time, to clear out obstacles like having only one staging environment, or having sort of an immature automated testing framework, having no feature flags, having all these things that a mature software company requires to be really, really nimble, and building that out while we're also supporting business, developing new products, hiring new people, is been extremely challenging.
Wow, it's clear you have your hands full. When we spoke earlier, you told me about what you do with hiring. Could you share with me a little bit about your approach to hiring?
Absolutely. When we spoke earlier, we were still in the middle of like very, very fast growth spurt. My philosophy hasn't changed though. I usually, I am the believer that the people who I want to work with are not necessarily looking for a job. And that's why I focus a lot of my management philosophy, engineering management philosophy, is based around the part of the management job is recruiting and like actually bringing and picking the team members that you need to move the organization forward. I'm a very active recruiter. We hired our first technical recruiter in December. So out of all the people who we've hired, all of those folks were hired directly by our engineering management team. And we devised a process from start to finish that had sort of all the components that was respectful of the engineering craft. So no brain teasers, no whiteboard interviews. Your job, like we consider that your job, we should try to mirror the skills, an evaluation of the skills that you use day to day, and not whether you can interview well. So we publish that process, for example, with all our job postings, but it tends to be very simple. Phone screen with the hiring manager. There's a take-home exercise that is fairly straightforward that we anonymize results. It should take less than 4 hours of work. If in some cases we've even offered to pay for consulting time if people consider that this will affect or have an impact on their income, because not everyone can afford to interview with every company. We take that take-home test, we anonymize the results, we have a very objective rubric, or as objective as we can, by which we judge the interview exercise. From there, we have an in-person interview, usually via a Zoom call like we're having, where we discuss the approach taking in the exercise. So one of our exercises is to build a sampler. The front-end exercise is to build a music sampler, where we'll give you an input and we would like to see like how you build the UI of the sampler. So we like to talk about the work you've done, the decisions you made, whether you tested or not, why did you, or how you could improve it. Of course, time is never enough. You can always build it and make it better. And that allows us to really gauge your technical approach in an environment that is relatable, right? You can Google, you have source control, you have documentation at your tips, you have some requirements, you can always ask questions. We don't usually get a lot of questions about the exercise, but that's also something we tend to look into, whether people like ask insightful questions about the exercises that we're taking. From there, peer interview with potential product or designers that you'd work with, conversation with me in a principal engineer, where we'll talk about architecture and if we're hiring you for a very experienced position, then we want to gauge whether you have demonstrated experience of designing big systems or making architectural decisions that have broader impact, and we move forward. Our team is distributed, and this allows us to expand our talent pool, and it allows us to access talent that can't live in a city or doesn't want to live in a city like New York. If you have a couple kids, you know that you can't raise kids in Manhattan without tons of money, or maybe you want to be close to family, or maybe there's many reasons why people can choose not to be at a main city, especially as people grow together. They want to have families. They want to live their lives, and you shouldn't. My belief is that you shouldn't optimize for folks who choose or who are privileged enough to stay in the city, because there's folks with tons of experience outside of hubs that are very experienced and have seen challenges that other folks haven't. So that's also part of our philosophy. We expand our pool as a distributed team that way, and it allows us to have a more diverse group of people to work with as well, diverse experiences and backgrounds.
Okay. Yeah, it seems like you have a very empathetic, system towards candidates. And I was going to ask about diversity, but this is part of, because I know you're a big advocate of diversity. So by being so flexible like that helps you with your diversity efforts, it sounds like.
I am. So being a music company, in any product in technology, I believe more than diversity or inclusion, what matters is representation, right? Because we've tended to take now diversity as something like that's visual, like, oh, you look different, therefore you are different. But to me, it is about representation. Of course, representation of all backgrounds, genders, identities, any person needs to be represented, especially as we're building the future of the world, right? Splice is building the future of music. Music is rooted in culture. And if we are not an engineering organization that is represented, that we're actively expanding the representation of backgrounds and cultures and stories, we're doing a disservice to the product that we're building, right? We're not going to have the experience, the overall shared experience, to make judgment on whether something that we're building affects another group of musicians or of music producers, or it homogenizes some music, it appropriates maybe instrument, right? The only way we can really build the best product we can is through representation. We're lucky that the folks who have chosen to join Splice come from everywhere. I don't tokenize my team, which is why I don't go around talking about stats and but you can check out everyone on LinkedIn that has Splice Engineering. It should give you a good idea of how well we've done.
All right. Thanks. What would be your advice for managers who are just starting out?
My advice for managers who are just starting out. There's a couple things. One, recognizing that you haven't really been promoted. You're taking on a completely new new challenges, new responsibilities, new everything, and it is a career change, right? I'm usually not a fan of giving advice without context. So any management advice I do give, please take it with a grain of salt, because I come from a different background. I am a Latin American man that has a very unique experience, and I tend to be very punk. So I'm feels I don't care about stuff. I tend to not respect authority, and that has made me sometimes easier. It's made my life as a manager sometimes easier, sometimes harder. So my advice is rooted in my experience as a manager. I guess that's number one advice. Number 2 and 3, let's say. Be aware that context, just like what I'm saying, matters a lot. there's a lot of folks who jump into management, learn about one-on-ones or how to run meetings, immediately write about it as they're trying, which is great that we're sharing all that knowledge. But sometimes it works for them and it sounds very successful because their context may be that they're in an organization that supports that. And it may not relate to your experience. So anytime you read any management book, anytime you read or you listen to podcasts, you watch this interview, beware of the context that surrounds that person's success or failure. Because management, what I've learned is that I can't accelerate it. It's like baking. It takes the temperature and time, and it's going to take a temperature and time for you to get to a net result. And you can't speed it up. You're going to have to make mistakes, and you're in control of people. You're going to make mistakes that will affect humans. But the context is what's going to matter when you're consuming books or any material about management. Be very aware of that, how it applies or it doesn't apply to you. Lastly, the first mistake I made as a manager was committing my team to an unreasonable deadline. The funniest part was that as an engineer, I was fighting like, oh, management doesn't care about our timelines and this is unreasonable. And right after I became a manager and at OnSwipe, I remember I went to the executive team. They asked me a question if we could ship something like in 2 weeks. And without even thinking about my team, I said yes. And I learned the hard way that I shouldn't have been making those decisions or those commitments on behalf of my team without them. So that's a mistake that you can prevent easily.
That's great advice. Great advice. So a lot of managers, they're very busy. And so what is your workday like, and how do you manage your time, emails, meetings, and all that?
Cool. It's a pretty good question. I am very busy, but I've started recently, in the past year, I've started understanding or thinking about my time very differently. And first of all, as a manager, I have zero time to listen to music because, and what started having me make that observation was I missed the deep focus time as a programmer where you listen to music and it's you and your editor and nothing else and your music. That's not what management, especially executive management or leadership, looks like. And not my discovery, but my enlightenment has been that my time is not mine. As a leader, my time belongs to the 50 or so folks who I am responsible for. So going to executive meetings to gaining context or making decisions on their behalf is where my time should go. Spending time with my leadership group or my engineering management cohort so that they can have the proper direction, the proper tools, the proper support is where my time should go. And as much as I can go and sit down and write some code, it is not what the organization requires of me, and it is not my job. That's when you start thinking about management and writing code, or managers who can still write code. I respect that. I am of the belief that if my time is supposed to maximize or multiply the efforts of everyone who reports to me or who I am responsible for, then I have to be very thoughtful of where I invest every hour of my day, because it affects many individuals. I could be making an offer and support the expansion of my team, or of course I could be writing some code or reviewing some code, but that's not my job anymore. My days are very busy. I structure them by themes. So Mondays, we work in 2-week iterations that are, so we have 26 iterations a year, and we organize ourselves, our schedule as a technology organization, product design engineering, is on a rolling 2-week basis. So we start iterations on Monday, like iteration planning. I take on Tuesdays mostly executive meetings and product office hours. I start my day late or later than most people, about 10. But I work also a little bit later a lot later than most folks. I am more of a night owl. My brain doesn't work until like noon or so. So I try not to take too many intensive meetings ahead of lunch. We now call it, or we've started calling it, instead of no meeting Wednesdays, which emphasizes the value of meetings, we're more like protecting the focus Wednesdays. We have to find a better name, but the idea is this is focus time, uninterrupted focus time. Feel free to decline meetings, especially managers. If you don't have to, don't book meetings, right? Thursdays, also a series of executive meetings. And it's also when I start my one-on-ones. With others, I have one-on-ones of a week. It depends on how new they are to the organization, how much support they need, or how involved I need to be in whatever they're working on. At the time, I have 8 direct reports. So our Gorsuch, who runs production engineering, a few engineering managers, and then 3 principal engineers are currently reporting to me at the time. So that's a little bit of how I structure my time. I've worked with someone on my team where I've established a partnership with Ariel, who has been my EA for about 5 years. And if we use our time very effectively, we're a very good team, and she helps me run most of my operations as well.
All right, that's really interesting how you use themes and all that, and yeah, certainly that's great. You have a good EA. Could you share maybe what's a personal habit that you feel contributes to your success?
Personal habit that contributes to my success. I'd say, I think I've mentioned it earlier today, but it is both probably a blessing and a curse. I'd say that questioning authority, which comes from like me listening to rebellious music like hardcore punk, has helped to my success, because I not only question other people's authority, but also mine. Like, I'm constantly evaluating my power. So it's been very helpful in my career, first, like growing, like questioning executive leadership, questioning my peers, questioning management, questioning other departments. Of course, friendly, not like defiantly, but not taking sort of the word that someone in a position of power or authority says for granted. I really need to understand why decisions are made, or why there's like the motivation behind things. And it's helped me. It's also gotten me into trouble a little bit, especially when I was younger. But over time, I've been working towards becoming a lot more effective with my communication. So when I question or when I give feedback, instead of being defiant, trying to be effective instead of being right. Because in the end, if I'm a member of an executive team, it doesn't matter if I'm right. What matters is if our team got the outcome that we all expected. So that's a little bit of what I've been working lately. And I do think that my punkness has contributed a lot to my success.
Nice. Could you share internet resource, tool, app, something that really helps you at work that you couldn't live without?
Okay, I'm waiting for a moment because there's some people here, and I will respond in a moment. Cool. So any resource or tool that I couldn't live without.
Something you rely on that really helps you in your work.
Lately, I've been using Notion a lot. Notion is sort of a wiki, but it's like a Markdown wiki, and I used to use Bear, which is a Markdown writing app for OS X and iPhone as well, but it's not collaborative. And I think about 8 months ago or 7 months ago, we started using Notion at Splice company wide, and it's been fantastic. I organize all my one-on-ones with a Kanban board there. We have a lot of documentation there. I use it to share notes with my leadership team, my engineering leadership team. It's been great. I think I'd say Notion.
All right, I'll have to check it out. Sounds good. If you could recommend one book to managers, what would it be and why?
Here I have to go with Camille's book, Camille Fournier, who used to be CTO at Rent the Runway. Her book is called The Manager's Path, and just her ability to synthesize the experience of being or becoming a manager or navigating the path of leadership is, I think no one has her ability to synthesize that experience. Just as I was reading her book, I was just nodding. I kind of knew already what she was saying because I had navigated that path, but I couldn't summarize it or synthesize it as well as she did. So I think it's a very light book. I read it in a day, but it's just packed with knowledge. So that's the book I recommend.
Yeah, that's a great book. All right. Almost last question here. What is your approach to mentoring and coaching members of your team?
Oof, that's a great question. I don't know how traditional or not this my my approach tends to be, but in general, I consider all my team members adults and grown-ups, and this. So on one end, I am a very people-oriented manager, but at the same time, I also like pushing people to the deep end of the pool and giving them floaties and letting them know that I'm not gonna let them sink, but that there's this huge ambiguous problem that they can handle, that I trust completely they can handle, and I step back. That tends to be my style with new managers, with experienced managers, with senior managers, also with ICs as well, just giving them big problems that are unstructured and having them navigate through it. In addition to that, I do provide a lot of sponsorship, either by connecting my network to these folks and providing like meals. Hey, I'll connect you to this person. You can expense the breakfast, and you'll get this advice from or insight from someone who is the smartest person, who is let's not say the smartest, who is the best or the most experienced person on a specific problem. So that's one of the things I tend to do. In finding opportunities for growth is also part of my approach. I've discovered, or it's probably not a discovery for many people, but an insight I had was that by being in a position of authority, people expect me to know everything. I come from a non-traditional computer science background, so I don't always know everything. But since I've been involved in open source communities and conferences and sort of like I've established a good network, I always know someone who has solved that problem. So my expertise comes from the network. So it multiplies. It comes from everyone who I know. And I haven't yet encountered a challenge, a technical challenge, a systems challenge that I don't know someone who has already solved it or who has already encountered it or who has at least an idea of how to approach it. So I guess one of my other competitive advantages for folks who are in my organization or who I work with is that they always have access to everyone who I know for coaching or for mentorship opportunities, and that has been very, very helpful.
All right. Juan, you've been like super generous with your time, and I really, really appreciate it. It's been like huge value from your interview. I think everyone's really going to have a lot of good takeaways from it. Just as we close here, where can people go to learn more about you? And I know you write stuff, for example.
Thank you. Yes. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me and for these very insightful questions. I think I learned a lot about even myself just answering them. You can find me usually on Twitter. Is probably the best way to go. I go by my last name, which is a little bit hard to pronounce. So I'll say it in Spanish, which is Buritica, or in English, Buritica, Buritica. On Twitter, you can find me there. You'll find my website link there as well. And I'm pretty active on Twitter about multiple things: distributed team leadership, engineering, empanadas. If you have questions or want to learn about something or want to show me something, just tweet at me.
That's great. Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks again. And I think that concludes this interview.